Warning. The following video contains strong language that some viewers may find offensive or disturbing.
Are there people within the trans community who regret changing their sex and realized it was just a phase that they grew out of? If so, what was that like, and did you change anything permanently that you now regret? Yeah, I thought I was a guy. Turns out I'm autistic. Autistic traits are seen as inherently masculine. The way that females generally socialize is inexplicit and with unspoken rules and body language, which is something that I struggle with. Not being able to socialize with, as a girl, and all these things I did being seen as masculine, it's a reasonable conclusion to come to. I was also dealing with body dysmorphia, which I thought was related to my gender. But it wasn't. I hated literally everything about myself. Basically a mixture of hating my body and being socially inept lead me into believing I was trans. I'm still not comfortable with my gender, but presenting as male didn't help me hate myself less. It just added the extra issues of being discriminated against because of it. Edit. You can be both trans and autistic. This is my experience, and from the responses here I can see a lot of people resonate with this. However, if you know someone who is trans and autistic, then don't assume they aren't capable of making the decision to transition, or that they aren't really trans because they're autistic. That's not how it works. You can be both, and it is 100% okay if you are both. Please don't use my experience to invalidate others. One of my children has had serious mental health problems as a child, and sometime well into that, formed an extremely strong and compelling belief that he should have been born a girl. This was getting on for 20 years ago. He was about 7. I had come from a queer-friendly background. And while I found the whole thing very challenging, I was wholly supportive. I assumed for a while, in line with the prevailing wisdom of the time, and probably now, that his other problems were a byproduct of gender conflicts. We engaged with the trans community and trans therapists. All that. The situation was acute while it lasted, which was about a year, plus another year of entangling what had unfolded. At one stage he was out of school for a long period and under around-the-clock supervision because he was talking about self-harm, not really directly related to his trans-like presentation. He was troubled much more broadly than that. But the anxiety around the trans thing didn't help. But once he was fully convinced that everyone would stand by him, he could be a girl, go to a new school where he was only known as a girl. He'd chosen a girl's name. The situation had been explained to all our extended family, etc. The whole thing just evaporated. This is a very unusual presentation and resolution for trans. Because, clearly, it wasn't real trans. In his case, as much as we can figure, it was an extension of his oppositional defiance disorder. He refused to accept that he had to be limited in any way, including gender constructs. With enormous amounts of intervention, he got through his many underlying problems enough to become a productive and reasonably well-adjusted adult. He's now a flamboyant, metrosexual, rather eccentric man, but definitely identifies as a man. To be clear, I believe that trans exists. I still have a number of trans and gender-fluid friends from that time. All that, but not all trans-like presentations are trans. As our experience shows, support for someone presenting as trans is still beneficial even if the person turns out not to be trans. But a certain amount of very gentle and sensitive gatekeeping of irreversible trans therapies is essential to avoid tragic mistakes. Emo. When I was 16 to 19, I really wanted to be a man. But as I met better people and left where I was mentally, I realized that I just wanted the respect that a man got. I was fully comfortable with being a biological woman. I left the people I was hanging out with, and it changed me completely. A man, went through a phase of desperately wanting to be a woman. I hated men. I thought they were toxic, out of touch with their emotions. And I wanted to do girly things. Unlike other trans people, I phrased my feelings as wishing I was trans, rather than believing I was a trans woman. I eventually realized men aren't that bad, and I can be a man who likes girly things. My best friend got in a relationship with a girl who didn't want to date any guys. So she started manipulating into thinking he was a trans woman. He was madly in love with her. So he went along with it. I knew him well enough to realize that he wasn't trans. But he wouldn't hear it. He was completely convinced he was, despite never having expressed any kind of discomfort before. Only later did he realize he was in an abusive relationship and broke up with her. He never really got far enough to transition in any way. But the memories of that relationship still haunts him. Creepy shit. A good friend of mine from college transitioned from M to F and went all of the way, including the genital surgery. After a few years, he went back and is now living as a man. I don't know if he did any sort of genital surgery to go back. He had a few interviews on the web and even a blog called something like Retransition that documented the whole thing. The blog is long gone. He was not well received in the transgender community and has reduced his web presence to nothing over the last 5 years. Well, this blew up and I'm not really thrilled with some of the content. I want to make it very clear that I am about as far from anti-trans as one can be. I have a transgender sister. I have known many trans people in my life. As it happens, one of them transitioned back and I told his story. Too, I just got a DM from a friend of my friend from back in the day. He guessed who it was from my description. Small world. Parent here, daughter decided she was trans about 2 years ago, age 14, and we fully supported her. Called her by her chosen, male, name. Bought a binder even though it made me nervous. She cut her hair very short, it's shaved now. She never exhibited any masculine traits and still liked boys. We honestly just told her we wanted her to have kind friends and be a kind person. We just let her do her thing and now she's going by her given name at school, after 2 years of chosen name. And I think she feels a little more free to be herself without stressing. We never made it a big deal but did say we would not support hormones or anything until age 18. We never relaxed or restricted our parental rules or house rules or treated any of the kids differently. I think when someone knows they have support, whatever they choose to look like, or identify as, it will help nurture their true self to shine through. My main takeaway is just love someone through their choices. Unconditionally. Edit, thank you. I cried this morning reading your kind words. Like ugly cried. But thanks sincerely. Let's keep these important conversations going. 2 hearts, and to the people who did criticize. You motivated me to take my child out today on some errands and check in with them. Asking about all these things with some fresh information. I appreciate your concern. My fiancé transitioned FTM for about 5 years before detransitioning. She really regrets having had top surgery most of all. I think. She has no breasts left. And cannot breastfeed if we have kids. Etc. Most everything else can be fixed. But that's permanent. She might get breast reconstruction surgery someday. But that's just for aesthetics. She doesn't think of it as, or describe it as, a phase. However, she was 100% convinced that was the right and only path for her at the time. I think you have to be to some extent to go through with the surgery. It was a series of steps for her to start regretting it and to feel like she even could regret it. As difficult as it is to transition, it's in many ways just as difficult to detransition. She's a lot happier now than she was pre-transition or during transition. Because she's made a lot of changes in life that have helped her be a lot happier with who she is and how she expresses herself. I still have to hold her at night sometimes when she cries in regret of what she did to herself. But even so, she's much happier now. As unfortunate as it is, I think in some ways she had to transition to truly find herself. If she'd just buried the urge and stayed female the whole time, she would still be trapped in the sort of toxic, feminine mindset she was originally trying to distance herself from. Yay, I'm one of them. When I was 13, I really thought I was a boy. So I started dressing and acting like one. Even got my hair cut short. Wore a binder. It was mainly because I was really active in the Tumblr community and I sorta got influenced. I stayed like that for 3 years. Until one day I realized I'm not a boy. I'm just kinda masculine. I didn't change anything permanently, so I was able to go back to being a girl. But the way I acted still haunts me, lol. Don't listen to PPL on Tumblr at a young age. Not me. but a close friend. She decided that because she liked women romantically, she was a transgender man. So she became the most butch lesbian you've ever seen. 15-year-old girls are not known for their solid grasp of sexuality when education is denied to them. In Alabama, that education was indeed denied. She went through college as a male. Transgender. In the early 2000s. Anyone reading this who is either a female or has any knowledge at all of human sexuality will be shaking their head about here. She became uncomfortable living as a man, so changed back and lived as a lesbian. This was a bit wrong too. I won't deny her voice. I sort of didn't know the first thing about sexuality. Other than boys liked girls and girls liked boys. I liked girls, so I had to be a boy. Right. I learned a bit more in college. That girls could like girls. That took a lot of getting used to. A little later I had to accept another earthquake to my persona. When I learned I liked boys too, I thought I was weird and different and so, I'm a bisexual woman. We're the majority of women. This is why sexual education is important. Y'all. Single quote. I came close to it. I'm AFAB. And struggled with my gender a lot as a teen. I tried to talk to my mum about it. She said if I still felt that way when I turned 21, I could transition, and then basically pretended like I'd never brought it up after that. I was very confused and frustrated. I was the only LGBTQ person I knew at the time. I wanted to explore and experiment and try on the boy hat for a while, but it wasn't possible or safe to. But I knew I wasn't a woman. I spent a lot of time shitposting in 4chan and other toxic places because they're very good at sucking you in when you're vulnerable. I was extremely fortunate to somehow make a group of decent online friends that way. Many LGBTQ. Many still friends of mine to this day, some, approximately 14 years later. And one of these friends identified as agender. I didn't really pay attention to it at first. Then finally asked them what it was out of curiosity. It was like the sun breaking out from behind the clouds. It made complete and total sense. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. I'm still trans. But I have no interest in transitioning. And I think transitioning would have ruined my life. I can already grow a shitty beard. I don't need the help. I have a trans friend who was talking about considering detransitioning. It wasn't because they regretted it or that they didn't think they were what they transitioned to. It was because they would get bullied and harassed and were sick of it to the point they felt they'd sacrifice being trans just to not get ridiculed. When I was about 12, I was going through a really rough time in my life. I began seeing myself as trans FTM. I cut my hair really short, started wearing boys' clothes, and took up masculine mannerism. A few months later I realized that I'm in fact not trans. Now, I see myself as female with androgynous gender expression. From the time I was 8 until about 15, I refused to be called anything but Max. I wanted to transition but my parents wouldn't let me. I wore gothic boy clothes, had a boy haircut, and dated girls for most of that time frame. I eventually stopped thinking of myself as a boy but remained goth. I date men now but still love looking at feminine forms. And yes, I'm glad my parents didn't let me transition. It would have been a huge mistake for me. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. See you next time.